Let me greet each and every one of you this evening and welcome you to this National Town Hall presentation sponsored by the Greater Church of Deliverance Incorporated. We are extremely excited tonight to join in with what we believe is a tremendous opportunity to share accurate information concerning COVID-19, the virus, and the vaccine. As the presiding prelate of the Greater Church of Deliverance Incorporated, it is always a major part of our vision to share with our constituency and with the broader community information that matters, making sure that above all things, that those who are connected to us, the many congregations, pastors, their membership, and their communities are being given information that helps each and every one of us to make sound and prudent decisions. So to the many of you who are joining us live tonight over Facebook, over our YouTube channel, and directly from our denominational website, we want to welcome you and we want to thank you for being a part of this presentation. We have tonight several competent and consummate professionals who are going to engage in dialogue, a presentation of information, and most importantly, we believe an opportunity to answer your questions directly as it relates to this dreaded disease, but most importantly, this virus and the vaccine that has been released and available to all of us here in this country. We're going to talk about the efficacy of this vaccine, the safety measures. We're going to answer your questions and push to make sure that each and every one of you are empowered and feel comfortable as information continues to be disseminated. I want to welcome our panel tonight. I want to do so and at the same time ask those of you who are joining us specifically over social media to hit the share button, to tag members of your family, your community, leaders, bring your church, your congregations in for a moment, because I believe that this will be one of the most pivotal and important conversations of 2020. I'm honored tonight to welcome Dr. Goldie Bird, Director of the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity and Professor of Social Sciences and Health Policy of the Wake Forest School of Medicine. Dr. Bird, I welcome you tonight. I thank you for taking time out of your very arduous and busy schedule to share with us in this town hall setting. I want to publicly thank you for the work you do through the Maya Angelou Center, but also the work you have done over the years to make sure that our community is brought up to speed on the many disparities in health care here in America, and also the opportunities that are before us. I want to welcome you and greet you tonight, Dr. Bird. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bishop Marshall. It's my great pleasure to be here tonight.
All right. I'm having just a little problems with the volume. Can you say that again, Dr. Bird? I
So
want to
thank
make
you, Bishop Marshall. It's my great pleasure to be here tonight, and it's always a wonderful pleasure to work with you through several strategies that we've recently begun, especially our Triad Pastors Network. So it's such a pleasure to be here.
thank you so very much. I want to also introduce Mr. E. Benjamin Money, who is the Deputy Secretary for Health Services of the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Money, I want to welcome you tonight and thank you for your participation in this National Town Hall.
Bishop Marshall, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I greatly appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Our next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Joy Nicole Martinez, epidemiologist and executive director and founder of the Alchemy Agency. Dr. Martinez, welcome tonight. Thank you so much for sharing with us in this National Town Hall.
It's a great pleasure. I'm very honored to be here with you all tonight. Thank you so much.
Right, excellent. Our next panelist is Mr. Cornell P. Wright, Executive Director of the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities of the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Wright, we welcome you tonight. I see that he is, there we go.
There you go.
All right. And then finally, last but not least, we want to welcome the Reverend Dr. Kelvin Lamont Williams, Senior Pastor of the Diggs Memorial United Holy Church and the Community Liaison for Alzheimer's Research for Wake Forest School of Medicine. Reverend Dr. Williams, we welcome you tonight. We are going to jump right in and we'll work out a few of the technical glitches and get everybody visible and visual and vocal. But as our audience is building strongly, I want to make space for Dr. Goldie Bird to give us our presentation and introduction, really. And Dr. Bird, we'd like for you to take your years of training and experience and really help us to surmise or summarize as best we would be able to understand what COVID-19 is, where we stand with it now, and some of the opportunities that lie ahead of us. Dr. Bird.
Thank you, Bishop. I have a few slides and I'm going to just share my screen now. All right. Can everyone see that?
We can.
So good evening, everyone. I just want to start by sharing a little bit about the virus. I'm going to be brief because we have some very powerful speakers and we want to give them much more time than I'm going to take tonight. But I just wanted to introduce us to this year. And I'm going to frame this in how we're feeling right now. And right now, I think we're all very, very tired. And I'm just going to sort of give us a little roadmap of how we got to where we are right now. So when we think of this COVID virus, when we think of viruses in general, they are organisms that we can't even see. We have to have a special kind of microscope to see them. And when you see this beautiful bright red picture of a virus that's caused so much havoc in our lives over the past 10 or so months, what you see is on the top is what we're going to actually, Mr. Ben Money is going to focus on. That red protein, that red spike up there is called a corona. This is a coronavirus. And that spike, that red spike is actually looks like a crown. And that's where the coronavirus gets its name. Corona means crown. And so that virus looks like this under a microscope, a huge microscope. And so when we talk about the vaccine and we talk about the vaccine being made against the spike protein, that's that red corona spike that you see on that virus. What we found out a few months back, about 10 months back, is that we had this infectious agent, and it wreaked all kinds of havoc in our lives. It caused all kinds of problems, and so it was actually found in 19. So it's COVID coronavirus identified in 2019. So that's how it got its name. So we found out very early that it affected many organs in the body. We found out that there were many diseases that looked like it. It manifested itself in our gastrointestinal tract. It felt like a flu, and we had all these different symptoms going on. And so, and at the last bullet, we can see even heart rhythm problems and heart failure, things that look like other things. So we had a real problem on our hands. And then we found out that even after we felt better, if we survived COVID, after we actually felt better, we had brain fogs and other things that happened in our bodies. And so what we don't know right now is really what the long-term effects of this thing will be. And many of those who've had it have certainly said, there are ongoing effects of this virus. And then we were told to just start wearing masks and stay away from each other and wash our hands. And tonight we're going to add a fourth thing to that. We're going to add vaccination to that. And Ben is going to talk about these things for sure. Well, what we found is that over at the top left, what you see are refrigerated trucks where people were dying in New York especially, and then mass graves. And then we went to the grocery stores with our mask on, and we didn't see any toilet tissue and paper towels. Then there were empty classrooms. And then at the bottom left, we're talking about PPE, protective equipment, and everybody was all dressed down in this, and particularly in the hospitals. And then we learned about how our elderly folks were dying, people in the hospital, people in the prisons were dying because they weren't able to socially distance. And then in the next photo, you see lines of people trying to get tested. And then there were many deaths. And these deaths came with the inability to go to a funeral, to hug people who were dying, to hug family members who were dying, to even have a funeral because we were afraid that someone might get infected. And then there were even bigger issues, if you will, the outcomes of COVID: lost jobs, wages, businesses, loved ones, education loss, social isolation, mental health. And this is just a short list of what actually happened to us, and particularly those of us of color. And so our businesses were disproportionately being lost. Our lives were disproportionately being lost. And so right smack dab in the middle of that, we had Black Lives Matter, and really all of these things converged so that we were really a stressed people. People who work in places where I work were asked to do certain things like lead task forces on racial equity. And that became more of a minority task. So we were just burdened from all over the place. And so when people talk about COVID fatigue, for people who are disproportionately burdened with the virus, with the infection, and with the death and dying, we really and truly are fatigued. And it's not because we can't go to a ball game or go to get coffee or go to a bar. We're fatigued because of so many different reasons. And let me just share with you briefly why. And so even back in July, we got news that there was some exciting news about a potential virus, a vaccine to this virus. And so I'm not going to talk about it because Ben's going to talk about it. I just wanted you to know that the mRNA virus called COVID-19, it didn't just start. Making this vaccine didn't just start. So we just want people to know that. And while it is coming to us at a rapid pace, it's not because steps were missed. So I'm going to leave that right there. So one of the things that people often say is that when when white America catches a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. And so now it has a new, even a morbid twist. When white America catches the coronavirus, Black Americans die. And that's what we have seen, and not only Black Americans, but also Hispanic Americans, and also people in certain conditions who have to live in congregated, close conditions, and people who who also suffer from disparate conditions that improve health in general. So we talk about health disparities, if you will. So Maya Angelou says, beneath the skin, beyond the different features and into the true heart of being, fundamentally, we're all more alike than we are unalike. Unfortunately, we have not been treated this way ever since African Americans specifically, and other people of color, quite frankly, came to this country or were abused by this country. So because of this history that we have, we find ourselves in disadvantaged neighborhoods and disadvantaged situations, whether it's socioeconomic or education or where we live, where we play, where we stay. And these things have actually contributed to the disparities in not only COVID, but many other chronic and acute conditions. So we don't want anyone to leave Bishop Marshall tonight thinking that there's something wrong with people of color because they get disease more than other people. Things like the Tuskegee syphilis study, which is a 40-year-old study supported by the federal government, have placed some distrust in the minds of people of color. And not only that, but things like the eugenics movement, which is forced sterilization, which was really big even at the institution where I work. And so Americans, African Americans, and not only African Americans, but other Americans also may fear the COVID vaccine because of some of these things like Tuskegee or the Henrietta Lacks experiment and other atrocities. And because of that, because of the atrocities and because of the way we have, our health has been marginalized, we end up with stats like these, where African Americans, American Indians, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans are more likely to get the disease and die from it than whites. What some good news, though, we just learned last night that yesterday that there's going to be a little bit of relief. We do say little, but it's better than what has happened. We also learned in the past few days that 2 drugs have been authorized. 2 vaccines have been authorized for emergency use. So that's good news. We've seen a lot of celebrities who said they were going to listen to Dr. Fauci, and if Dr. Fauci said this was ready, this vaccine was ready for us to take, we're going to do it. This is my husband who took his shot on Saturday, and no, the needle is not in his arm, but he's legitimate. There is his card on the right. So I actually leave you with, it's important for us to know what is happening with the virus, where we are, why things look the way they look. And it's important for us to know that if we all take this vaccine, or we take if enough of us take it to accomplish herd immunity, which I believe is about 70 to 75% of us, we can come close to licking this disease, and we can slow down the death because of this disease. And I'll just stop right there. Thank you.
Dr. Bird, thank you so very much for the recap. Thank you for the information, because you have spoken specifically to many of the concerns that continue to pervade our community. And so thank you for sharing that. I'd like to also insert, your husband is an essential worker.
He is.
He is a physician, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so have there been, and I know we're not at the question and answer period, but have there been any side effects that your husband has experienced since receiving the vaccine?
He had a little bit of soreness, and he just took it yesterday. But he got up this morning and he was doing katas. He's a 1st-degree black belt. He's not having any trouble whatsoever at this. Now that's just that's just vaccine number 1. But as of today, he is doing just fine. He, outside of the soreness that he had just yesterday, which he doesn't have today, there is none.
Awesome. And I appreciate you putting emphasis on the fact that as African Americans, as Black people, there is nothing wrong with us.
Right.
Specifically, that causes there to be such a high number of deaths as it relates to this. This is all equated to the disparity in healthcare.
Yes.
That has been just provided for us really generationally. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's not only access to health care, but it's the structural racism, that the systems that are put into place legally, by the way, years and years and years compounded, that have kept certain populations, not only African Americans, but certainly African Americans, but these systems have kept us from achieving in such a way that our outcome, and the health outcome is just one outcome. Our educational outcomes, our socioeconomic set, all of these things are actually tied together. And so so it results in situations and environments that leave us in a place where our health is just the outcome of all of the other things that are compounded together.
Thank you for that clarity,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Bird. Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I want to bring into the conversation now Mr. E. Benjamin Money. Again, he is the Deputy Secretary for Health Services here in the state of North Carolina, the Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Money, we want to again thank you for your time tonight. Come and share with us from the perspective of public health and government what you believe we need to hear tonight and our listeners need to be introduced to.
Thank you so much, Bishop Marshall, and thank you, Dr. Bird. Your presentation was excellent. And I just want to share my screen for a second here. Want to make sure, can you see this now?
We can, yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. How's that?
Awesome.
Very good. Very good. I am here tonight to talk to you about the COVID-19 vaccines. This is something that Dr. Bird mentioned in her very comprehensive overview of 2020. Wow, what a year it was. When you think about all the things just related to COVID that happened in 2020, not to mention all the other developments around the world, it was quite a year, and it still hasn't ended yet. But you know, it is ending with hopeful news on the horizon around the vaccine, which is being administered really across the country right now. And I know that the audience tonight is a national audience. So while my presentation does focus on North Carolina, I'll try to highlight areas that are occurring across the country and corollary issues and progress being made in other states. So one of the things that we're very excited about is that the COVID-19 vaccine, 2 of them, are here, and you'll soon be able to take this safe vaccine to protect you from getting COVID-19. Now, one of the things that Dr. Bird mentioned was the fact that, you know, there's some justifiable criticism about the vaccine, the speed, how the vaccine was developed. But one of the things to note is that unlike other periods of time, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, there's a large number of African American, other people of color within the vaccine industry, within the National Academy of Sciences, within the Food and Drug Administration, within the Centers for Disease Control. And like me, we've prepared ourselves, our lives, for an event like this. And we have been duly doing our due diligence and critical of information, of research, and have really put our eye to make sure that things were done correctly. And so when we come to you and say, we believe that this vaccine is safe and it will protect you from getting COVID-19, it's because the research has been available, it's been reviewed, and we're recommending that you take that vaccine. The federal government is underwriting the cost of the vaccine, so it's going to be free to everyone, regardless of what state you're in. It's going to be free. So we want to give you some information that you need to know, but I also want to say that my presentation is going to be an overview because I want to leave enough time for us to have questions and answers so that you can get your concerns alleviated, just like health professionals have gotten their concerns alleviated regarding the vaccine. So These vaccines are tested, they're safe, they're effective, and they will help us get back our control of our lives, back to the people and the places that we love. I know I've got a soon-to-be 3-year-old grandson that I haven't seen in quite some time except for Zoom, and I'm looking forward to actually giving him a big hug and rubbing his head. And so how did this happen so quickly? You know, we weren't even aware of COVID-19. It wasn't even a name this time last year. We knew that there was something going on in China, but how did they come up with a vaccine so fast? Well, the thing is, scientists had a head start. The technology that has been used to develop these vaccines was done years ago. Okay, so the techniques were years in the making. This really was a culmination of research that had been going on for quite some time. We also know that there are thousands of volunteers that help with these clinical trials. I mean, COVID brought out the best in people. It really did. It brought out people that were willing to roll up their sleeves and be a part of a clinical trial. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. One thing to note is that you can't get COVID from the vaccine. There's not any COVID in the vaccine. And the way the National Academies of Sciences has recommended to states, and most states are adopting, is that people who are most at risk get the shot first. That's how we're doing it in North Carolina. And we want to assure you that you do have a spot to take your best shot at preventing COVID. So as I said before, scientists had a head start, decades of work developing vaccines for similar viruses. And the first 2 vaccines that are on the market now used a method that researchers have been studying and working on for many decades, right here in North Carolina, in fact. And so the 2 that are currently available, the Pfizer vaccine, which was available last week, and the Moderna vaccine, which is just available this week, were rigorously tested. Now, normally in clinical trials, you have 3 rounds, and these clinical trials had 3 rounds as well. But normally there's usually about a couple thousand people that volunteer in clinical trials. In the case of the COVID vaccine, there were 70,000 people alone that volunteered for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine to make sure the vaccines were successful. And the research findings indicate that the vaccines are 95% effective in preventing COVID-19. There were no serious safety concerns in the clinical trials with either vaccines. And, the temporary reactions that take place are very similar to what you would get if you had the shingles vaccine. I had the shingles vaccine last year. I had a sore arm, had a headache. I felt kind of tired, a little bit out of it. For a day or 2. Actually, it was just 1 day after the first dose. And just like the COVID vaccine, it's a 2-dose regime. So you get the first dose, and then 21 or 28 days later, you get the second dose. And you may have those same side effects, temporary reactions the next time. So, and the other part of the COVID clinical trials was that, they knew going into it that there was a concern about from historically marginalized populations, Black people and brown people, that with the rapid development of this vaccine, that there would be some risk associated with it. And so one of the things that they did was they went out and actively recruited people from Hispanic Latinx communities, from African American communities, from Asian communities, to make sure that there was a wide array of volunteers so that they can have that evidence to produce the findings necessary to get the vaccine approved. And so a large number of people from all groups volunteered for these clinical trials. And so one of the things, as I said before, you can't get COVID-19 from the vaccine. What the vaccine has done, as Dr. Bird mentioned, is use messenger RNA technology, which essentially utilizes a technique that instructs the body. So the vaccine has a messenger RNA in it, and it instructs the body as to how to create antibodies for COVID-19. If you think about it, almost like sending the blueprints to your body so that your body can make those antibodies. And when it produces the antibodies, if your body comes in contact with COVID-19, the actual virus, then it has the antibodies to be able to fight off the real virus. Okay, that's how vaccine works. That's how this particular vaccine works in particular. And again, this technology has been around for a while. It's been the opportunity through an efficient process of development, as well as a process in which the federal government essentially said, as soon as you determine that this vaccine is safe and effective, as soon as you start getting that evidence, we want you manufacturing it so that when your clinical trials are done, the vaccine will be ready. Right after it's approved, we can get it administered and people can get the shot. The federal government essentially said they're going to underwrite the cost of producing the vaccine in parallel to the latter stages of the clinical trial, so it would be ready. It was a risk that they were willing to take because of the nature of this pandemic being so deadly. And so, as I said before, 2 shots are necessary with both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. I will say that there are 4 other types of vaccines that are currently in the pipeline, undergoing clinical trials right now. And I know at least one of them is a 1-shot regime, but in the case of the 2 that are available right now, it's a 2-shot regime. What that means is your body starts with the first shot to build up its immunity. And then it's the second shot that comes 3 to 4 weeks after the first, where your immunity, bumps up to that higher level, that 95% level. And those temporary effects actually mean that the vaccine is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and that is create that reaction so that you can start to build that immunity. We also have developed within our state a vaccine management system, and the federal government has developed systems as well, and there are other systems out there. So depending on what state you're in, you may be using a different electronic system, and that system is really there to make sure that people are safe. So if you had a reaction and you called your healthcare provider and said, I really felt lousy, then they would know and be able to put that in the system, and we'd be able to monitor that. The other thing that the vaccine management system does that's really important is it makes sure that people know when to get that second shot, because it's like a 21 or 28-day window, depending on which vaccine you get. And it makes sure your healthcare provider can schedule it. You can put it in your day timer or on your phone, and it will also provide alerts and reminders so that your time's coming to be able to get the vaccine and to allow for that second dose. So it's also important to know that your privacy and your personal information are protected at all times. So there's nothing that's inside this vaccine that tracks you. Okay, that vaccine management system is something that happens at your doctor's office through an electronic health record or other means. It's not anything that actually goes inside your body. What happens with the vaccine when it goes into your body is it provides those instructions, and then its components just, they go away, they get absorbed. So your personal information is protected, and we don't, in North Carolina, send any of your personal information to the Centers for Disease Control. I mentioned before that the federal government is paying for all the vaccine. They already have. So these vaccines are going to be available to all. Supplies are limited at first. The federal government is really using population to be able to determine how many vaccine doses to distribute to each state. But because they're being manufactured, they can't distribute all the doses at one time. And in fact, these vaccines require storage, they require refrigeration. In the case of Pfizer, ultra cold storage, you've probably heard a lot about that. So it's not like you can make them all and put them in the refrigerator. And you've also got to make sure that you have enough staff on hand from health systems and others to be able to administer the vaccine. So every state is working with their federal partners on the vaccine plan for their state. We've done that in North Carolina. But I think consistently across the country that the focus is on protecting those people that are most at risk of getting the infection, most at risk, if they do get the infection, of severe complications and death. We do know that as production increases, there'll be more supply through 2021, particularly as more vaccine types come on the market. And if you don't have insurance, again, the vaccine is still free. So we want people to recognize that they've got a spot to be able to get their COVID vaccine shot. So this is a little bit of a complicated chart here, but it sort of defines the kind of 5 groups. And I will say at the onset that just this weekend, the Center for Disease Control and their Vaccine Advisory Committee has started looking at this guideline, which first came out from the National Institutes of Health, and then North Carolina pretty much modeled that framework that essentially, provides most at-risk individuals with the vaccine first. So most at risk healthcare workers who are fighting COVID-19. So, and when I say healthcare workers, I mean everyone from doctors and nurses to people that are mopping the floor, changing the laundry and the linen, because they're at risk because of that constant exposure if they're working in a COVID ward of a hospital. And we also want to make sure that our long-term care facilities, where we've seen so much death, so much infection, in terms of the patients as well as the staff, get their vaccination first. That's the current stage we're in right now, utilizing the Pfizer vaccine within the hospitals. And then this week, the rollout of the Moderna vaccine to get started in long-term care facilities beginning next week. When we talk about the next 4 phases, this is likely to change, but again, folks that are at highest risk are going to be getting it first. Highest risk for exposure, highest risk for severe illness. So where are we right now? Our healthcare workers, such as the physicians and nurses, those caring and cleaning areas of COVID-19 patients are getting it. Long-term care staff, they're getting vaccinated at their hospitals or local health departments. And then for our long-term care staff and residents, the federal government actually is managing this particular process, and they're going to be vaccinating people within their facilities through a partnership with CVS and Walgreens. So that's how that's going to be taking place, starting really next week. So every week, the state and other states as well receive shipments of COVID-19 vaccines. So the federal government, I said, decides based on population how many doses we'll receive. And then the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, my agency, determines which providers will receive those doses based on how they can reach prioritized populations, right? And then the manufacturer actually ships the vaccine to the local providers. So they have their addresses, they know how much, and they ship it to them. And then it's the provider's responsibility to make sure that they don't waste any doses, right? That they've got the refrigeration, that they're handling it safely. We've already provided training so that they know how to administer the vaccine. We don't want any of it wasted. And then, in our state and others, North Carolina, we're vaccinating in phases as the vaccines become available. So we want to make sure that people know how to find a spot to get their shot. And it's important that they stay engaged with their healthcare provider or their employer about where their spot is in terms of prioritization based on their health risk. And also, their healthcare provider is being informed now. They're being registered in the systems. We're doing right now, we've done the hospitals, we're doing local health departments, doing our safety net providers now, and then soon the primary care providers will be registered as vaccinating providers in the system. And we've put up a special website, yourspotyourshot.nc.gov, to get more information. And we'll soon be having more information about where we are in the phases. So you'll have a better sense of when your spot to get your shot will be coming up. And so it's also important to remember, as Dr. Bird mentioned, that we really are recognizing and acknowledging that the history of racism, systemic racism, really runs through our social, our economic, our health systems. And it has caused stress, it's caused health disparities, and it's caused a lot of just skepticism and concern about this whole vaccination process. You know, people say, well, people that are in hospitals that are cleaning the floors and getting the laundry, that are doing that frontline work of getting the vaccine first. Is that, yes, that's right, because they're exposed, they're at risk, and we want to make sure that we're focusing on equity, we're focusing on risk and exposure. And we also learned a lot from people like Dr. Berg. We're drawing on their experience of our leaders in our historically marginalized communities to help us develop and implement this plan. You know, when we were first experiencing COVID and really contemplated the development of a vaccine, we knew that we needed to have people advising us on this process. So this work has been taking place longer than the vaccine has been available. And as I said before, so many medical professionals that are Black and brown are involved in organizations like Centers for Disease Control, American Medical Association, the National Medical Association. They've all come out, along with the NAACP, encouraging Americans to get vaccinated. And so we are updating our resources because we want you to have frequent information. We want to be transparent with what we know and what we don't know. So we're putting up frequently asked questions and updating that on a regular basis, as well as updating the slide deck. So if you hear me do this presentation next week, it's going to be with updated information because things are moving very quickly. We want you to know about it. But until we have that vaccine, until it's available, it's going to be important for us to practice the things that have kept us safe thus far. Our 3 W's: to wear a face covering, to wait 6 feet or more apart, and to frequently wash our hands. We also want to make sure that people are limiting their social gatherings, okay? Stay with people that are within your household, because this is a time across the country right now where it's colder weather, COVID's a respiratory virus, and there's more transmission in North Carolina and the United States now than there has been since the start of the vaccine. So again, information about how to find your vaccine, how to find your spot, your shot is available up on our website. And we want to make sure that you have that information. And we want you to also be empowered to share with your friends, your neighbors, members of your congregation, the importance of the vaccine. So go to our website. If you get questions that come to you, feel free to utilize that information. And always, always, always ask questions, be a critical consumer of healthcare, and learn from reliable sources the importance of this vaccine and what it will mean to us and to you personally to be able to be protected from this COVID-19 virus. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Bishop Marshall.
Mr. Money, thank you so very much for such a tremendous presentation. And I want you all to know that the questions are just pouring in. And that excites me because it says that our constituency and those that we're reaching tonight are really listening. And there are several public health questions, and we'll get to all of those. I know that you all are qualified in your own way to respond and to answer. I want to introduce at this moment Dr. Joy Nicole Martinez, who is an epidemiologist and is executive director and founder of the Alchemy Agency. Dr. Martinez, thank you so much for being a part of this presentation on tonight, and we appreciate the expertise that you bring to this moment. I want to just simply release you and allow you to share with those who are waiting, because I know they want to hear from you.
Again, it's just such a pleasure to be here. It's such a vital topic and a critical time for this conversation. I will say this, Mr. Money is, you know, I can remember before medical school working with him. Dr. Bird is a hero of mine. So I'm so pleased to be here and to have this conversation with such valuable voices. My perspective is different because I moved from kind of a administrative policy role to a clinical role. So when I decided epidemiology was my path, it was because I saw how racial and socioeconomic disparity moved throughout our medical system. And having experienced that, I decided, okay, now we have to make policy and clinical work come together. So I see one of the questions I keep seeing popping up is, why haven't they made vaccines like this before? Well, there's a part of me that says, well, we all know the answer to that question. COVID-19 is an economic issue, right? This has caused a blight on our economy. And in part of it is being very politicized. So when you have money and politics together, people move. And Mr. Money was right when he said, now we're different because we have people at every level of government, in every area of healthcare, in every area of administration. That has not always been the story for Black and Brown persons, especially in America. And because we do now, when we're saying this is safe, we're not saying it because we're on the outside looking in, regurgitating someone else's experience and repeating someone else's ideal and saying something to you someone told us to say. We're saying, I am telling you it's safe because I was in the room. And because my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, my uncle, you know, those people, I watched them be harmed, right, by this healthcare system, by this system of socioeconomic and racial inequity. I'm not willing to say something is safe and efficient if it is not. So I think what you're hearing us all say when we acknowledge the skepticism is, let's be honest. Yes, we have been abused. Black and brown bodies have been abused, misused, devalued, right? And have been the most critical part, so to speak, of the movement toward things like this vaccine, right? We've made technology and science make leaps and bounds forward at our expense and had not been compensated still. So I don't say lightly, take the vaccine, it's safe. I am saying this is not someone telling me to say it's safe. I am telling you our eyes are critical, right? We are watching every step. I'm reading you will not say two words unless I've read it, reread it. I'm going to take it apart, pull it. I want to see every piece of data because we can't afford, these faces cannot afford to stand in front of our community, our families, and say, this is okay for us. We can't afford that. We've had too much of that. And I don't get paid to do that. So I consult with organizations deliberately. So I can sit on webinars and say, they don't cut my check. I can say, it's safe, you can take it, because our eyes are critical. So it's important, I think, for us to understand that the people you hear tonight are saying something to you, not because they're being told to say it. You hear a title, you hear the state, and I understand that mistrust that happens. But I'm also saying these people have given their lives, their careers, and I've watched them. I mean, my parents have worked with these people. So I'm saying this is not something we're saying because we're being told to say it. We are literally saying we're watching critically what has happened. Yes, other coronaviruses should have had vaccines developed as quickly. That is true. This coronavirus is novel. Coronaviruses are not new. So part of what you see, the rapid response, was because we've been working and responding to coronaviruses for a very long time. A very long time. This particular coronavirus is novel or new, but all that research was able to be applied in developing a vaccine more quickly. So and because there was the additional incentive of the economy imploding, right? And the additional incentive of many people dying, that research was fast-tracked or warp speeded into fruition. So that's why when you hear people say, well, why didn't they do it for the rest of them? They didn't have the same motivators as this one, right? So that's a nice way of saying what we probably all know. I think it's important also for us to talk about the fact that if we don't in our community give the best information, our community will continue to die. So we don't get, COVID does not know how much melanin is in your skin. It doesn't reach out and say, oh, she has more melanin than him, so I'm going to attack her. What it knows is that it can infect. The issues around our death and dying have more to do with our exposures in our nutrition, our exposures in our lack of healthcare, our exposures in not having transportation or not having a testing site that we have transportation to get to, right? Our exposures, those lacks that exist in our lives that make it harder for us to access the same resources our counterparts have. It is not because you're Black. That is not the case. And I tire of hearing that message. Oh, well, because I work in this field, I have to listen to sometimes well, COVID is killing Black people. Systemic racism and health inequity is killing Black people, right? That the fact that I'm able to give a certain line of treatment or formulary to one person and not the other, okay, that's another webinar. We won't we won't go there. So I'm saying all of that to say, are there going to be side effects? Yes. Like any other vaccine, you might feel sore. My mother grew up in a time where in her mind, she called and said, well, don't they put COVID in it just like they put the flu? And I said, well, where did you hear they put the flu in the flu? Honey, this is 2020. We are not just throwing live viruses in. But that because we've been told that misinformation and disinformation so long, and because we've not been responsible in updating our language in our community, we've not been responsible for updating how we share in our community, we've allowed that misinformation to continue. And that's what we must stop. That's why we have to have town halls and webinars. And if we do decide to get together, please don't get together. But when we do, why we have to sit across the table and really talk about our fears and our concerns, and then find resources that are valid. If you are just reading the headlines on Facebook and the 240 characters on Twitter and not actually reading the article, you will never actually get real information because they're made to make you click. They are not written to make you learn. So my perspective is different in the sense that I'm trying to help us not just be treated well in the healthcare system. I'm not just studying the progression of disease. I'm studying the progression of infectious diseases in our community and why they move the way they move. And yes, there are systems in place that have manipulated and deliberately caused us to be more ill, but we can fight that to some extent. We've seen that in 2020. There's some fight in us, right? But what we must do on top of that is we have to stand up within our own homes and within our own families and within our own communities and make sure that we are giving and sharing the best and most appropriate information. So that's my soapbox. And I will yield the floor so we have time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez. Let me tell you, I think you have inserted into this conversation tonight some extremely real points. And I can tell by the questions that are just continuing to roll in that all three of you have opened up the minds of our viewers, and you have touched some very sensitive places. I want to ask this, and I know that Dr. Williams has joined us. We welcome him. and Mr. Wright is also with us, and we want to definitely get their presentations here. But I want to raise this because it seems to be a recurring question. And because diabetes is such a rampant concern of disease of concern rather within our community, could you all speak to what you might know as it relates to how type 1 diabetes and those who are diabetic are responding to the vaccine? This comes from Marion Brody Williams. And I think this is just one of the persons that has raised this as a question. Any one of you?
Okay, so I will just say I've not read where in either the Pfizer or Moderna trial where anyone that had type 1 or 2 had major side effects. Now we know, again, the soreness, the lethargy, even some low-grade fever. And I know we've also heard some more severe symptoms. They haven't been directly related to diabetes, right? So if you are diabetic, especially type 2, like any other vaccine, you want to check your blood sugar levels 24 to 48 hours before receiving the vaccine, and then the same afterward. But there have been diabetics in both clinical trials, and not that I have seen up until Friday afternoon, I've not heard any worrisome symptoms, because if that were the case, the trial will be paused and they would have corrected them. So
thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez. Thank you so much. I want to insert into the conversation Mr. Connell P. Wright, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And Mr. Wright, I want to thank you for your participation and the sacrifice of your time on tonight. I want to give you an opportunity to share and present with our followers and viewers on tonight. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. What we've been seeing and hearing throughout the night is just the pivotal information that we need in our communities. And because it's so pivotal, we have to make sure that the information that we're taking in is not taken lightly. Two things I want to raise up as we start this conversation, and I hopefully get to the questions a bit sooner. So, as the preachers have said to us before, I will not be before you long. But I want to make sure that we understand two things. Right now, currently, we are not vaccinating children. We are vaccinating ages 16 and up. So that's one thing I want to raise up. And then the other thing is I want to raise up the fact that whatever vaccine you start with is the one you need to get the second dose for. So if you get the Pfizer vaccine, then whatever the length of time, 21 days or 28 days later, you need to make sure you get that Pfizer vaccine. Same with the Moderna. If you start with the Moderna, you need to end with the Moderna. So those are two things I wanted to make sure we raise up as we get into this conversation and take questions in a second. But the bigger thing is making sure that we are hearing from our trusted leaders and sources in our community and making sure that those voices are heard and very loudly put together in a way that we're also building capacity for our communities to be educated, to be able to make informed decisions. This is the purpose of meetings like these, and I thank you for making sure that we are reaching out to the communities in a way that they can comprehend why it's so important to be educated. The education that is being provided today is to help you make an informed decision. I know we've had conversations about trust issues and the past and historic traumas, and those things are real. But we really are in a desperate time in our lives that it's like nothing we've ever seen before. So you have to educate yourselves and educate others to be able to make those informed decisions. And what's important is that as we educate ourselves, we're able to respond to things real time. The work that we do in North Carolina has been going on since 1992 in my office. And so what's going on now has been able to propel the work that historically marginalized populations have been able to connect to and get resources from and get education from. And so as we move forward to response and recovery efforts for this for this virus, and promote the education around vaccine, we have to make sure that as we move forward, that we're not forgetting about the important aspects of historically marginalized populations that have been suffering for so long. So I'll stop there so we can get into our questions, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Wright, and thank you again for your valuable insight, your years of ensuring that every segment of the population is being served. And for what all of you bring in that regard, this is an absolutely tremendous moment. I wish that we could hit up MSNBC or somebody to literally follow up on moments like this, because I believe this is where the real information is being shared with those who really desperately need it. Dr. Lamont Williams is on with us tonight, and we are so excited for his presence. He's a senior pastor of the Diggs Memorial United Holy Church, an Alzheimer's disease community liaison with the Wake Forest School of Medicine. Dr. Williams, come on and greet us tonight and share your insights as it relates to this virus and the vaccine from a community standpoint, specifically as one who pastors in the African American community. But you're out in the community sharing, you're touching the real lives that are being affected by this on a day-to-day basis. Will you share with us? Welcome tonight.
Good evening, Bishop. I've had a few technical challenges. Can you and the team hear me? Hello?
Go ahead, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And so I greet you all this evening. I've had a very interesting perspective as a community leader and a faith leader as well. One of the quick challenges I'll leave with this listening audience is, as Dr. Tribble has stated, the bedrock of the African American community is the African American church. And I think that's a good place for us to start our conversation this evening, knowing if you're going to impact, have any level of interaction with the African American community specific, history has taught us well. The African American is so grounded by the African American church. So that becomes critical even in this season that we're in. For we now, in the African American church specifically, have to grapple with this synergy between science and the sacred scripture. As I have heard so many pastors in our community trying to find a place to have a soft landing on the vaccine, as well as trying to be relevant with the sacred scripture. I want to just leave you briefly with a thought that it was Noah who kind of talks around the same concept when he grappled with the great pandemic of his time. There was a teaches us in Genesis 8 that he used the science of two birds, the birds of a raven, the bird of a dove. The science of those birds, what and all is. Noah uses that, and he benefits from it by knowing when it is safe for him and his family to exit the ark. And so it is with us as we find ourselves in this pandemic, dealing with the skepticisms of vaccines. I think in the faith community, one of the things that I have found to be the most permeating is how to be relevant with the vaccine and still be grounded in your Christian faith. I cannot say, I can only echo what has been said as we have heard all of the many skepticisms, and many, rightfully so. But I can see as a community liaison that there has to be some intentionality around bringing that synergy to the scripture and the actual synergy of this time in which we live in right now called science. As you well know, when you think about the two, I always kind of think of it like this. I say that religion and in the African American community, I really don't think enough attention to the important storytelling. And if I could just speak to the listening audience, it would be around who is that trusted storyteller in your community. For many of us, it may be that grandmother who was the one that took you to church and gave you your first experience. Or maybe that storyteller that you have a face of trust on, maybe that school teacher in your community that brought you to that place of a Christian experience. Or it may be, as many have said, that faith, that path that walked you to that place of Christian. Whatever that trusted place or person is, I think that's a good place for us in the faith community, is to kind of delve down into who is that storytelling person that can effectively tell the story to get us to bridge the gaps between healthcare and our community. My grandmother used to always say, time is the best storyteller of all. And so while we all talk and try to make our case, history will look back on us and it will have its own version of how well we told the story. I like to also say that in our communities, our faith leaders have to be the champions for health. For example, for myself, I'm no stranger to bringing health professionals, nurses in to the local services of checking high blood pressure, HIV, or other comorbidities that our minority communities may face. I would also advocate that our faith leaders lead the charge around the importance, even in our sermons. We know that many of us are virtual, but when you look at the vaccine, I promise you that our community is lingering and listening on every listening letter and syllable of the minister's words. Like, Pastor, tell us, shall we or shall we not? And so as a faith leader, it's critical for us to be able to have that solid perspective on where we stand. But can I tell you that there's a lot of risk involved in that. For when you make that position, there's nothing any worse than saying you're on the wrong side of history. And so that's why you find a lot of pastors somewhat reluctant to be able to say, yes, this is exactly what it is. So we're not, many of us, medical professionals. And so therefore, you lean into science, but you ultimately have a foundation on your faith. In other words, you can't just say, here's what we're going to do to you, or here's how we're going to help you. That level of paternalistic perspective is, I feel, one that has harmed many of us down through the years. And if we're going to make any impactful progress, we're going to need to be able to lean heavily on the science. But for crying out loud, we don't lose our faith in the process. And so for me, to the listening audience, I always leave you with the words of the African heritage when they talked about the Sequoia bird. They said that the ultimate balance of intellect is how do we not minimize the trauma of the past while being optimistic of the hope of the future. The Sequoia bird flies forward with its head looking backward. And so as a faith leader, I'm always bothered when somebody tells me to just get over it, because there is a lot of trauma that still lingers in our community. But I'm also a community liaison, and I go out in our community and I try to get us to engage in clinical trials, such as this vaccine. But guess what? If we don't come to the table, this is what I try to say as a faith leader. If we don't come to the table, then history will go on and the conversation will go on, but it'll go on without us. God bless you.
That was a tremendous response and just presentation. Thank you for your perspective. Thank you for the service that you give. I want to get right into the questions that are piling up, and I know we will not be able to get to all of them, but there are some who have been with us from the very beginning of this presentation. We have several questions that ask, and as I present these, I want our panelists to know that just as the question comes, your expertise and your perspective is welcomed. And in no certain order, if you can just grab them, that would be great. But this question from Robin Hayes: does the vaccine work for those that have been diagnosed to be positive or in the hospital with the virus?
So what we've heard and what we've read is that if you've been infected, it's still good to take the vaccine. And the reason is because based on current information, the immunization that you get from being infected is short term, and it may last about 90 days. But if you take the vaccine, it's longer. And so you're fine if you've been infected, and if you go ahead and take the vaccine, you're better off to take it than not.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that or share? Let's move on then to this next question. Valerie Mann Poe raises the question: does the vaccine need to be taken every year like the flu vaccine, or does it need to be taken every few months?
I will say, agreeing with Dr. Bird, it appears right now this will probably be an annual thing. Again, this is a coronavirus. Coronaviruses, we see in the UK now there seems to be another strain. And remember, this is a vaccination, much like your flu shot. It is developed for this strain. If that changes, we'll have a different one on the next season. And then also, this is not about I guess we could talk about, we're talking about the severity of illness. So this vaccine is to help, if it's like the flu vaccine, if you get the flu, that you won't be as ill, right? So we've not studied enough. We're there, but not all the way. The transmission post-vaccine, we just haven't had time. And so we really can't talk about longevity because that part has to be calculated further out. So it appears you may need to take it every year. We won't know that for some time yet, but certainly I don't think every few months.
Okay, excellent.
And this is the novel coronavirus. So we're still learning about it. But one of the things that we were hoping when the vaccine was being developed was that we would have an effectiveness rate over 50%. We thought if we had a vaccine that was 50% or more effective, that was a success. To hear that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are over 90%, in the case of, Pfizer 95, Moderna 94%, that is tremendous. That is tremendous.
Awesome. Let's lift this question. Lily Grant asks, what are the side effects, as you know them now, of the two vaccines? I know that Dr. Bird spoke about some of what her husband has experienced. Is there anything else that we can add to that? I know that's a place of concern.
Well, you might get a fever for a couple of days. And if you do, it's probably a good sign, because it just says the vaccine is working. And so if one gets a fever, it's nothing really to worry about unless it's sustained or something. But just for a couple of days, it's very likely, and particularly after the second injection, usually you will see that more after the boost than you do in the first injection. May get a few aches, but they're short-lived. Now, some people have gotten some allergic reactions. Those are very, you don't see that very often, but that they have gotten, some people have gotten some allergic, some anaphylaxis reactions, but those are very rare. And one of the reasons that they ask you to stay, my husband had to sit for 15 minutes after his injection, just to make sure that he was going to be safe and that he wouldn't get a reaction, and he would be there in the provider's office if something happened. So we're all required to sit for a few minutes just to make sure those things don't happen.
There was also some reports of what they call Bell's palsy, which is like a weakening of the face in people that were in the clinical trials, but no more than what would be expected in the average population.
That's
so
right.
Took that same, number of people and pulled out that percentage of people with that reaction. It would be no different than anyone who didn't get the vaccine, no different than the general population.
Okay. Thank you all for
we talk about it. I'm mother to 5 children, and my children are 11 and under, so they won't get the vaccine, but they are very interested in the vaccine. What I explained to them was this: some people have a reaction to Tylenol, right? They have an allergic reaction to Tylenol. It makes them feel kind of sick and ill, gives them GI or stomach issues. We don't pull Tylenol off the market, right? So we're talking about a very small portion of the population. I've only been able to find 4 anaphylactic events so far, and we're talking about thousands of people being vaccinated. So when we say a small population, but the warning did go out: if you have a history of that type of allergic reaction, then you should discuss with your primary care provider your history and how that might affect you moving forward. So that would be the same warning or the same advice we would give for anything, including Motrin, or that you should discuss your particular history before receiving the vaccine. That is just imperative with any kind of medical intervention. But the side effects are just like any other shot. Again, a vaccine, this one particularly, is trying to tell your body how to respond should you become infected. So you will feel your body working in response to that message.
Right.
That's where the side effect comes from.
And really, they're temporary reactions. Temporary reactions, as Dr. Martinez said, that shows that the vaccine is having the effect to build up your immune system. Yes.
As a matter of fact, if you look at almost any over-the-counter drug and you read the fine print, you'll see all kinds of side effects. You'll see the ingredients that are in those drugs. Well, in this vaccine, you only have about 4 or 5 things. You've got, a lipid, a nanoparticle, a very small particle of lipid. You've got some salts, and you've got the mRNA, and that's pretty water. It's a very simple. It's a complex vaccine, but it's in terms of what's in the tube, it's pretty simple.
Awesome. Derek Wallace Jr. raises this question: how would your body know if you have or haven't been exposed? And I think what this question is centering around is, when March hit and there was so much discussion, there were those people I know who were saying, I felt like in February, January, I was going through something like this. My doctor sent me home, said it was an upper respiratory infection or pneumonia. How would a person know if they've been infected, I guess is the word I want to use here, but they've been asymptomatic? I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think that's where the antibody test would come in. Like if you give blood or if you get blood drawn, for, a, a procedure at your doctor's office, they can actually run an antibody test. And that antibody test can be helpful in determining if you have had COVID.
Awesome. Awesome. Another question.
Otherwise, Bishop, you might not. And that's the scary thing about this.
Right.
Because, I'll go back to my husband since I put his face on Facebook in the world now. Right? So he could have been infected and not have had a symptom. I could go around him, gotten it from him. He would not have necessarily been sick, but I could have died. So he could have been a carrier, and that's why he continues to wear, even though he's been vaccinated and will get the second one, he will continue to wear that mask and socially distance and wash his hands until we get some kind of herd immunity, and particularly when he's around my grandbaby.
Yes.
And Dr. Bird,
I heard that, Dr. Bird.
That's a very important point that, are practicing those 3 W's, the wearing of the mask, waiting 6 feet apart. We're going to be doing this for a while.
Yes.
Until we get that, immunity in the population.
Yes.
Awesome.
Just want to piggyback that. Remember, this vaccine is not so much about transmission as much as it, right now, as far as our knowledge base goes, as much as it is about the severity of illness should you become infected. And until the second dose, it is not at that level of efficiency. Right. So you can't just take the first dose and then just decide, okay, that's it, take my mask off and I'm free, right? We still have to continue the safe practices. Yes. You get the second dose. And then again, because we're not talking about how you're transmitting it, even though now you have a level of immunity against it, developing severe illness, that speaks nothing to whether or not you're transmitting it to other people.
So I think that's also a great point. We are still young in this pandemic and in treatment. And now the good thing is that we have better treatment. The scary thing is we don't know which of those treatments is going to do better for me and not so much for someone else. And I think the science is still, it's really burgeoning. We're really in such a much better space, but we're still infants in this pandemic with regard to how different people get it, different people manage it, So we must continue long into the summer and even maybe after that to be careful and to be mindful. People, it is expected, the last I heard, and some of you might have heard a different stat, but I heard that by April, it could be 500,000 people dead unless we do something. Wow. Unless there is an intervention. That was the last stat I heard. And so, and one of the sad things, Bishop, is that I heard just yesterday that in California, they're talking about rationing care, which means they will take care from the most ill patients and give that care to someone who might survive. Wow. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be on the end of that story.
Absolutely.
So we really have to continue to be mindful. Yeah.
What you raise here is such a serious point, because it seems, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, that many of us who have already been marginalized would probably fall in that categorization.
Sure.
Of not receiving that care. This question has come 3 different ways, and we'll pull it from Valerie Witherspoon from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. If a vaccine for COVID was developed so quickly, why not for other viruses and diseases as well? I know that Dr. Martinez kind of hit on that in the beginning of her presentation, but I want to open that to all of you and to see where we stand on that.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Martinez brought up is really the essence of it, that, this is a a worldwide pandemic, and it's impacted not just health status of individuals, but the economy. So there was the greatest of impetus to do things in a very efficient, precise, but expedited way, without cutting corners, using the best science that was available. And, quite honestly, the efficiencies that were developed in producing the COVID vaccine are being discussed as efficiencies that should just be in place. Sometimes you've got science and then sometimes you got bureaucracy. And so what was done with the development of the COVID vaccine was really focus on the science and cut out as much of the bureaucracy as possible, to make sure that the phases of the clinical trials happened in a very expeditious but precise and well-managed way. And so, this experience in the pandemic should allow for the development of new therapeutics in a more expedited way so that we can get, drugs to market, vaccines to market in a faster, more efficient way. Hopefully that will ease the burden of illness, but also create those kind of efficiencies that may start lowering the cost of pharmaceuticals as well.
So I totally agree with both speakers, and people began to work together. Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech began to work together. So when you have the best minds internationally beginning to talk to each other, my excitement is that I hope more young people will go into science and medicine, and I understand that we believe they will because of this. And to have Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett in the room and other folks of color like her is certainly a testament to our ability to get into that space. So mRNA and DNA have been around forever, but when we can use these tools to advance health in such an efficient way, and again, the SARS virus has been around. It's been around. And this technology has been worked on long before now. But when you put all of these best minds together and billions of dollars in place, and when many people are dying, it speeds things up, and it just does. And so, but these technologies are technologies that our children can learn. They really and truly are. Our next generation will be a part of the next pandemic.
And Dr. Bird, I'm so glad you mentioned Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett.
Yes.
Because I would encourage folks to go to the NAACP's website and their most recent web forum on the coronavirus and the vaccine. She actually developed mRNA technology. African-American female from right here in North Carolina. And her presentation is just excellent on how it works. So if you want to get it from the source, get it from the person that developed it.
Awesome.
Thank you for that, Ben. That's right. Yes.
Marion Brody asked the question, are elected officials considered essential workers in North Carolina? I'm not quite sure where that question comes from, but I'm going to pose it because it's a part of what's coming in. Are elected officials considered essential workers in North Carolina?
Well, at this point, I've not seen anything that's gone outside of the framework that assesses risk of exposure and risk of severe illness. So it would be within the risk parameters of the work that they do, or the risk parameters of their personal exposure, or in the case of individuals with 2 or more chronic diseases as defined by the Centers for Disease Control that put you at risk for severe illness of COVID, they would fall in that categorization. But simply being an elected official in North Carolina is not a risk category.
Okay. Some of these questions are coming now from our YouTube watchers. COVID-19 vaccines were developed. This is a question. COVID-19 vaccines were developed to control the population through microchip tracking or nanotransducers in the human brain. True or false? I'll
False.
give that over to the professional.
False.
False. So we hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And the closest that I've come to understanding how this concept came up is, when they ship the vaccine from the manufacturer, they put a tag on it, a radio tag, kind of like the tag you have when you buy a product at not at the grocery store, but like Best Buy. Let's say you're buying a stereo and the box has this little tag on it where they can track it. The reason why they need to have a tag so they can track the box, not the vaccine itself, but the box, is so that they know that it actually went to a healthcare provider. And they also know, was it stored at the cold temperature that it needs to be stored throughout that process. You don't want any time where the temperature rose above the recommended, storage and transportation level. That's why that chip was there to track. Now, the other thing that we use data on is data to determine which vaccine you got. Did you get a Pfizer vaccine or a Moderna vaccine? And when your second dose is due. Remember, I talked about that CDMS, that coronavirus vaccine management system that we developed in the state. It really is there to help us keep track of who got the who got the vaccine, did they have any side effects, and when your next dose is.
Awesome.
I just want to say, we don't need it. I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government, our state, local governments don't have to spend billions of dollars microchipping us. We microchip ourselves every day, all day long. Yep. We share our locations, our data. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, YouTube, they don't have to spend their money. We spend our own microchipping ourselves. So just in a logical sort of sense, it makes no sense for them to invest in technology that we're paying for already.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. This question comes, are these vaccines being developed using fetal tissue?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Awesome. And here is another question, I think that may be along that line. What about infertility and miscarriage? Will there be more infertility and miscarriage as a result of us receiving the vaccine?
That's a great question. And pregnant women are not being vaccinated right now. Is that right, Ben? I think
they're basically being asked to talk to their healthcare provider about the risk. And that would really pertain particularly to their an individual's risk for any temporary side effects or if they have any allergic reactions to vaccines.
Okay.
But there's no tissue in the vaccine, so there's no fetal tissue because there's no tissue in it at all. But again, as I said earlier, you really want to discuss, under 16, we're not vaccinating, and then pregnant women, Mr. Money's correct. It would depend, like any other kind of intervention when you're pregnant, how far you are in your pregnancy, how many pregnancies you've had, how many deliveries you've had. And again, remember, we are very young in this process. So there are some things we just won't have an answer to. But again, we are talking about building immunity. And while I won't say sure, I will say I've not seen that there's some correlation between miscarriage or infertility and a higher rate of immunity against a virus.
Okay. All right. Let me raise this question. My mother, who is 77 years old, called her healthcare provider today to question when she would be able to receive the vaccine, and was told that she would not be able to receive it there, and was kind of just left out there. Now, what my mother, and in our conversation, what she raised with me was, I thought those of us who were older were receiving the vaccine early. Can you all speak to that and help bring just some clarity to what we're hearing just over our regular newscast? And so many of these myths that are out here that I know we won't be able to debunk in these few moments we have left. But just speak to maybe that pecking order, so to speak, on the inoculation and the dissemination of the vaccine itself.
Yeah, so Bishop Marshall, like I mentioned in my presentation, just this past weekend, the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee has been looking at that framework for distribution of the vaccine. And one of the recommendations that they've come up with is to actually have a prioritization for people that are over 65, I believe it's 75 and older. And that is still in discussion right now. That is not, there've not been any, at least North Carolina has not changed our framework yet, because we're still getting the information and the recommendations that they made. I believe it was Sunday. So this is really, really current news that has yet been factored into the formulation. And again, we're just 2 weeks into receiving the vaccine in the state. We're still getting a sense of how much supply we're going to be getting on a regular basis. And all that really determines how that vaccine gets allocated to providers and when people, are I won't say eligible, but when it's the appropriate time based on the amount of vaccine we have and our ability to vaccinate people, when it's their time to get their shot.
Awesome. I appreciate your time tonight. I know we can't get to every question. I want to end by just simply giving each panelist a moment to really just kind of speak to our community. We've talked about the distrust. We know there are myths. We know there is a lot of misinformation. We know that we're dying. I cannot tell you the list that I have comprised of persons across this country who have passed away as a direct result of this virus. And we recognize that we are still dealing with cancer, diabetes, heart attack, heart disease, high blood pressure. I just want to give each one of you an opportunity to give a closing statement to this vast audience of persons who are tuning in, something that you think would be beneficial to each and every one. And we'll just kind of go in order. Again, Dr. Goldie Bird, Dr. Martinez called you one of her sheroes, and I said to you several months ago how much I appreciate what you do. I said to Dr. Bird, I found out that Black women save everybody, and she's at the top of that list of the Black women I know who are stepping up and helping us across the spectrum of needs that we have. We'll start with you, then we will go to Mr. Big Money, who is he's gonna be my man at the state and we appreciate it. Dr. Martinez, you are just phenomenal. Looking at what you do and how you have bridged so many gaps, I am honored to know you. We will then move to Mr. Connell P. Wright, who is for many decades now has been making sure that these disparities in healthcare are addressed from a level of state government. And then last but not least, Dr. Lamont Williams, who touches this community on a day-to-day basis in a very real and unique way. I'm going to ask him to close us out and even share a word of encouragement, just a brief word of encouragement for the many who are listening. Dr. Bird.
Thank you, Bishop. I think you give me a little bit too much credit, but one of the joys of doing this work and all of the work that increases awareness among different populations who are most impacted by disease, whether acute or chronic, is working with people like our panelists tonight. And I want to, and that includes you. I can tell you that we would not be where we are today with this vaccine if there weren't people who were willing to set aside some of their egos and work together. And it's been my great pleasure to get to know more people and to be able to touch more people and to bring thoughts and ideas together. I believe African Americans and other people who've been most impacted are going to step up to the plate. We already have been, the numbers are increasing. And I just applaud my people. I remember when I began my work with Alzheimer's, I was told emphatically that we would never get enough Black people to participate in our study. And guess what? We did publish some of the largest studies in Alzheimer's in African Americans. And we continue to do that work. So I have so much hope. I just believe that it is incumbent upon us as researchers, as administrators, and those who speak to the governor and to higher up. We just have an obligation to also speak to our communities and speak to them in ways that they understand and can make informed decisions. So I'm most grateful and humbled to be here tonight with you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Money.
Yes, and thank you, Bishop, and thank you, Dr. Bird. Thing that I would implore people is to continue to ask questions and get information from trusted sources. Get reliable information. But most importantly, particularly as we go into the Christmas season, don't let your guard down, because COVID is an equal opportunity killer. It waits for us to, be lax in who we're around and when we wear a mask or not wear a mask. And, I think one of the unfortunate terms that we came up with at the beginning of this pandemic was social distancing. What we really meant was be physically distant, but we need to be socially connected. And when you think about, how many churches and congregations have come together via Zoom. I know in my church, we've been able to connect up with members that moved to Texas and California. People, it's almost like a reunion. You get to see them. And so we need to keep that up, right? Sure, we want to hug. We want to, shake hands. We want all this to be over. Yes, we do. We want it to all be over. But it's not over. And as Dr. Martinez said, we're going to be wearing our masks. We're going to be doing our physical distancing for a while, until we get that immunity throughout the population through the vaccine. But until then, please, please, please practice those 3 W's of wearing your face covering. That's the important thing. Wherever you go, when you're not around people that don't live in your house, wear that face covering. Really be very mindful of that 6-foot distance. It's 6 foot at a minimum, right? And think about the number of people you come in contact with every day that are different and unique. And you want to minimize that, right? COVID's not going to last forever. These vaccines are the light at the end of the tunnel. But we're not at the end of the tunnel yet. So please, please, please be safe.
Thank you. Dr. Martinez.
I really have enjoyed this time. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Bishop. Dr. Bird, I absolutely adore the work that you do, and you are a phenomenal, phenomenal woman. Mr. Money, Dr. Williams is he's just an amazing person. I mean, anyone who's in this state and doesn't know Cornell Wright doesn't work in health. So, I'm just honored to be here. And I say this, and I don't say it lightly. I say this to us in this room specifically. We are measured by the way we treat the least of us, right? That's how we are measured. And so when you're considering how you move forward, Be less concerned with you and be more concerned with the least, our most fragile, our most exposed, our most at risk. That is how we are measured. That is the measure of who we are, how we move in faith, and that is also the measure of how we love. So we can talk the science all day long, but if we don't love, right, then we're not His. So those of us who are His, how you move forward, remember that you do that and do it for the least of us.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Cornell P. Wright.
I don't know how you follow that up, but that was beautiful. Um, as we reflect on our response and recovery efforts, we have to make sure that we are keeping in mind, as you said, the least of these. And the importance of that is in the work that we do, whether it be from a state level or working with partners in the community to do this work. I want to share something a bit more personal that I try to end with a lot of times, just to make sure people understand the impacts of what we're doing. I was a part of a co-leadership years ago at Duke University, looking at African American men who suffered from prostate cancer and had just received treatment. And one of the men in the study said this phrase to us and gave us permission to use it to share with others. He said, "Divine healing comes from divine direction to proper treatment." Again, divine healing comes from divine direction to proper treatment. So these things that we see that are put in place are for our benefit, and making sure that we educate ourselves to be able to make informed decisions, not only for ourselves, but our people around us and in our communities. So I thank you for allowing us to have this time together. And if, regardless of what state you're in, if you need more information, please make sure that you're connecting with the resources locally in your state. And if you don't see what you need in your state, come to North Carolina and we got it for you. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's
Awesome.
it.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Dr. Lamont Williams.
Thank you again, Bishop, to you and your entire staff. This space has been amazing. If I had to leave just one word, I'm a wordsmith guy. I would just lift up one word, and that's trustworthiness. I agree with Harry Fosdick when he says no virtue is more universally accepted as a test of good character than trustworthiness. In this season of the vaccine, I don't think anyone would argue any more of a weightier word than to have trustworthiness in the science community, and certainly trustworthiness as it relates to the faith community as well. I'm a faith leader. You asked me to give a parting word of inspiration. I could sum it up in one sentence. They told us in seminary that every good sermon ought to make its own gravy. Somebody will get that later, but I just want you to know, to the listening audience, if you could remember this during the pandemic, that the pandemic does not preclude the promise. And so it just simply means, yes, we're in the middle of some trying times, but whatever God said, He's good to His word. In that promise, there's purposefulness, it's passionate, and it's perseverance. Again, God bless you, Bishop, and it was an amazing an experience being a part of this panel this evening.
I want to thank each and every one of you for your time. Your time is valuable, especially during this time of the vaccine rollout. I know you're being pulled on by more organizations and institutions than you can answer. So we say thank you to each and every one of you, not just for tonight, again, but for your service that you render on a day-to-day basis. Thank you for sharing. To all of our viewers, thank you. Please continue to hit that share button and continue to tag those who will need this information. That's every one of us. I'm so glad that we are not just drawn to the dramatic, but we are also drawn to the informative. And tonight has been just that, informative. So thank you for sharing with us across this country. We speak blessings upon each and every one of you. We thank you for your time. Stay safe. Keep that mask on. Continue to physical distance and continue, please, to make sure that you are preparing to be in line. I like that. There's a spot saved for every one of us. And when your time comes, get that vaccine and let's continue to stay safe and stay alive. God bless you. Take care until next time.
Thank you.